We're joined now by senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum and senior fellow at the Steamboat Institute, also senior contributor at The Federalist, Kelsey Bolar. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
You reported out a absolutely heartbreaking story for IWF, and we have the first, it's a video, it's about 9 minutes long, people can watch it on YouTube. It's the first part in a series you're doing called Identity Crisis, about the consequences of the mainstreaming of extreme transgender ideology around the country through various channels, whether they are legal, social, cultural, and this video is very interesting. People should watch the whole thing. It's about a Chicago family. What we will play now for you, though, is the first couple seconds of it.
Oh, God. This sucks. My daughter's name is Sophia. She's amazing. On July 22nd, 2019, she went to her dad's house for a regular custodial visit, and she never came back. I later found out that she had told her stepmom and her dad that she was trans and she didn't want to live with me anymore. She felt unsafe. I missed my daughter's 13th birthday, her 14th birthday, and her 15th birthday.
All right, Kelsey, that's the perspective of Jeanette Cooper, who you profile here and you talked to extensively. Some of the basics in the story were included in that video that started when the daughter was 12 in 2019. Can you tell us just the facts of what's happened to Jeanette?
Absolutely. This is a devastatingly tragic story of a Chicago mother who lost custody of her young daughter, whom she loves unconditionally, because she insists that her daughter is a girl. As you mentioned, this started when the daughter was 12. The daughter's mother and father had divorced a couple of years prior. Jeanette Cooper had custody amicably 7 nights, 6 days a week prior to that. Once her daughter decided that she was transgender and wanted to live with her father and stepmother, the daughter claimed she was unsafe. And what we're seeing is this idea of a child being unsafe, which traditionally means there's some evidence of abuse or neglect on behalf of one of the parents, be weaponized to essentially be used to separate a mother from her daughter. And so the court did an extensive investigation, because that is what a court needs to do if any child claims they are unsafe. It took 7 months. Jeanette Cooper, as hard as that was, she understood that the court needed to investigate. According to what I referenced in my reporting, there was no evidence of abuse or neglect in this relationship. Jeanette is an incredibly loving mother, cares about her daughter deeply. What the court eventually accused Jeanette of is needing to further her understanding of a transgender identity. Jeanette will tell you she has an understanding of a transgender identity, but it is not the understanding that the court and all these institutions surrounding her want her to have. And so the end result of this is a mother who has been physically and emotionally separated from her daughter for 3 years. The only way she is allowed to communicate with her daughter is via postal mail. And Jeanette will tell you, people who are in prison have more communication with their children than she does. It is wrong, and what she is being forced to do is choose between lying to her child or having a relationship with her.
I think one thing we can probably all agree on is that nothing gets messier than custodial fights between parents over children. And anything that can be weaponized in those fights will be weaponized. What were you able to find out from the perspective of the child and from the perspective of the child's father? Because you want to see this from all different. Because you know when you go into these custody fights and you hear from one side, it always seems pretty black and white, and then you hear from the other side, and that seems black and white from that side.
Absolutely, and I want to be clear through my reporting. This was for Independent Women's Forum. I was telling the mother's story, and what I did in doing that was dig through many, many court documents where I could see very specifically what the father was alleging. And, essentially in the court documents, the father was speaking for his daughter. And, again, it was very clear the daughter wanted to be in her father's custody. And they were using this idea of her feeling unsafe around her mother in order to make that happen. And what Jeanette will tell you is that her daughter is essentially being allowed to parent herself. At just 12 years old, she's being allowed by these court systems to make these major decisions, such as cutting off her mother from having any relationship with her. And we know with a lot of these children who face identity crises, they eventually grow out of them. In fact, I do know from the daughter's public appearances, we did not publish her last name. Of course, we want to protect her privacy. She is a minor. But we know, I know through what I was able to see, knowing her last name, she has actually changed her identity. She appears to no longer identify as a boy. She identifies as Zim. And so this mother lost custody of her daughter for, not understanding her daughter's transgender identity, but it appears her daughter isn't quite sure what her identity is. And it is very much a fluid and evolving situation. And it's just tragic that this mother, can't even text or call her daughter. She lives 10 minutes away, but can't even see her. And what I really want everybody to know is this mother does not blame her daughter. She loves her daughter unconditionally. And in fact, she believes her daughter is the greatest victim in this whole situation.
I was curious about what Ryan said as well. And it was interesting because, Kelsey, you were on Federalist Radio yesterday talking about this. It was interesting to learn that in the court documents, this is the contention that is being made from their perspective. And what's interesting about that, actually what's really sad about that, is this dichotomy that unless you fully understand in the perspective, from the perspective of the left, the transgender ideology, so unless you fully support the transition of a 12-year-old, we're not talking about medically, we're talking about socially, whether you fully support that, if you do not, you are thus unsafe. So Jeanette, I'm assuming, is not, some sort of Republican activist or longtime conservative or Christian fundamentalist, but she disagrees with the full sort of ideology of transgenderism as it was applied to her 12-year-old daughter, and thus she's not merely a parent who disagrees, she is somebody who is deemed unsafe. And the interesting thing here is that that was injected to the point where a family court agreed with that interpretation.
Absolutely. And that's important to note. This starts with what people think is kindness, using the quote unquote correct pronouns at a preschool. But where does this end? Where does this path go? It ends with a mother losing custody of the daughter she loves. It is a very traumatic situation for the mother. Again, as hard as it is for her, she will tell you that her daughter is really the greatest victim in this whole thing. But we are at a point in society where these terms like unsafe are being weaponized by the left in order to further this ideology that ultimately is harming children. The daughter might think this is the best situation for her now. I think there's few people on either side of the aisle who would support the notion that a child being separated from her biological mother with no evidence of abuse or neglect is actually best for that child. But this culture of political correctness has really enabled the courts to allow this situation to unfold the way it has. And of course, this is in a very liberal area, Chicago, where the therapists and the communities surrounding them are all following this affirmation only model, where they do believe that if a parent is not fully on board with affirming a child's identity, they are unsafe to be around that child. And so, as crazy as this situation sounds, it is actually the natural conclusion of this entire gender ideology movement.
So are you saying that if Jeanette had affirmed the gender identity of her child, that this wouldn't have happened, that she would have maintained custody? And is that what the court documents say? What's the evidence for that? Or were there lots of different things going on, and this became one kind of cudgel or weapon, in a more expansive fight?
Ultimately, what the court documents say is, this is really the reason the mother no longer has custody of her daughter, no longer has visitation rights, and so forth. But I think it's important to note that early on, after the daughter went to her father's house and refused to come home, in an act of desperation, Jeanette actually did try to affirm her daughter. She wrote this very emotional letter saying, I want to know more about this, using the daughter's chosen name. I think, despite that going against her beliefs, I'm a mother. I think many of us would be tempted to do the same, so that we could have contact with our daughter. So there's a lot more forces at play. Again, I think this is really sad because it's ultimately a custody battle between two parents. In the final parenting agreement, it does allow for ways for Jeanette to see her daughter that requires her to attend certain therapy sessions. One of the therapists that she's required to meet with, however, that her wait list is full. And so Jeanette is really at a roadblock. But it's notable that the other path that could enable Jeanette to see her daughter is simply her ex-husband agreeing to allow parenting time. And thus far, that has not happened, despite Jeanette living just 10 minutes down the street from them.
And I think to Ryan's point, it's sad if this is being, whether or not this is the primary reason or one that's merely being weaponized. It is, I think, a really sad state of affairs that the child's gender identity, and if the gender dysphoria in this case is very real, it's extremely sad.
There's no evidence. There's
Right.
actually no evidence that the child has ever been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which I think is another important detail.
It's extremely important because we've seen plenty of evidence that social contagion is at play in these cases with young girls, especially at that age. So, but the point is, either way, the fact that this gender identity question can be wielded as a cudgel in custody battles is really sad. Kelsey, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both.
All right, we'll be back with more Rising right after this.